their way of thinking, federal lands should be put off of all people activity, and they should belong to an elite, properly educated, properly trained, left-wing stewardship. And these people should have unlimited access to all of it and to do what they want with it for the greater good, they say. So they don't want people mining, they don't want people drilling, they don't want people living there, they don't want cows grazing there, they don't want hereditary rights of families over multi-generations who are usually really good custodians. They don't want any of that.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Victor is the Martin and Ely Anderson Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and the Wayne and Marcia Buskey Distinguished Fellow in History at Hillsdale College, and he's the man in possession of a website, The Blade of Perseus. Its address is victorhanson.com. You should be wanting to go there daily, and you should be wanting to subscribe, and I will tell you why later in this episode, which we are recording on Monday, the 5th of May, and it will be up on Thursday, the 8th. I will tell you why you should be subscribing. Victor, we are going to begin the show with a little mix of things, your thoughts on this brewing, and who knows what will happen between today and later in the week, but this brewing conflict, struggle, whatever you want to call it, between India and Pakistan. And then we have Donald Trump saying he wants to reopen Alcatraz and put our most heinous criminals there. We take those stories. We have college presidents trying to join efforts to take on Donald Trump's actions, his executive orders. There's a new issue of Strategica, Lawfare. Who's happier, Victor? Single women or married women? All these things. Hopefully we'll have time. Have time for your.
I'm not going to make a cat lady Vance statement.
No, but there's polls, Victor.
I know there is. I saw them.
The polls have done the work already. So, anyway, we'll start off with India, Pakistan when we come back from these important messages. We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show. So, Victor, I think over 24 Indians were slaughtered in Pakistan. They were tourists, and it exacerbated the permanent tensions between these two bordering nations, both with significant populations and significant militaries, both of them in their ways allies of the United States. I don't know how much Pakistan is.
Yeah. I mean, after all, Mr. Bin Laden was living there under the auspices.
Victor, what's your take on this conflict and the consequences, and what should America's position be between the two nations?
I think we erred in the Cold War because India, given its post-colonial anger at the West and Britain, it's got over that now. I think a lot of people in India realize that the British gave them a uniform language and some institutions that were very valuable. But not after, in the 40s and 50s, India drifted into the orbit of the Soviet Union, even though it was still a democracy. And the
unaligned nations, right? It was one of the leaders
underlying nation, the third world. And we backed Pakistan and its illiberal government. And they'd had elections at times, but they were violent, and it was on the border of Afghanistan, and it was the home of a lot of radical Islamicists. And the net result was that in the Cold War realpolitik, we sort of alienated India, even though it was much more democratic than Pakistan. And now we discovered during the 20 years in Afghanistan that was an open border where the Taliban operated with exemption. And the Taliban were probably deeply integrated in the government of Pakistan in some cases. So a lot of Americans don't have a soft spot for Pakistan. We have more immigrants from India than we do Pakistan. Pakistan is a Muslim country. India is a polyfaith country. I mean, there's Christians, but it's primarily Hindu, but there's Sikhs and there's Muslims. I think you could argue that Muslims might be treated more equitably in India than non-Muslims are in Pakistan, but that'll be controversial. I'm sure I'll hear somebody write me about saying that. And then I don't know the actual nuclear ratio, but I have a feeling that Pakistan's got somewhere between 150 and 200 nuclear weapons. Probably India's got 300 to 400. India's army is much bigger. India's population is well over 1 billion people, much bigger than Pakistan. Pakistan has been much closer to the U.S. military. It's been trained by the U.S. It's been equipped more so than India until recently. Modi is now a big ally of the Trump administration. We're drifting closer to India than we are Pakistan, so we're in a transition. All that said, Pakistan over the years has said explicitly that a smaller country like that, juxtaposed to India, if there was an existential tension, it would not be afraid to preempt and use nuclear weapons. It would have to get the edge. It said that. And it's like North Korea and Iran have boasted numerous times about preemptive use of nuclear weapons. I mentioned it in the end of everything in the epilogue with some of the things the Pakistanis have said. So it's a very volatile place, and it has all these deep ethnic and caste and religious and geopolitical fault lines. So anything can happen, and anything might happen. I don't know whom Marco Rubio is calling, but I'm sure he's trying to allay tensions. But usually Pakistan is the aggressor, not always, but usually. And, we're trying to develop this new relationship with India as a democracy and as a way to play off China and Russia. Given India's got a lot more, in my opinion, even though it's not as successful, I think its GDP is about the same, about 5% growth per year. But even though it is not as successful as China in terms of recent wealth, it has more potential. And I know it's more fragmented. It's got more ethnic and religious divisions. It's not authoritarian, so we hear more about it than China. And we have more, but my point is this: there are a lot of Chinese Americans with distinguished roles in American society, but they tend to be inordinately from Taiwan, or they were refugees from the mainland. But India is a little different. We have thousands of people from India now who are coming with advanced degrees. It has enormous advantage over China in that it's English speaking. It has democratic institutions that are, they're 60, 70, 80 years old. It has the British influence. So it should be closer to the West and more successful than China eventually. And it may well be. I hope so.
Yeah.
But Modi is a sort of Trumpian figure. I don't think when he says something if he's not going to be an Obama-like Biden figure. So if Pakistan tries something that he sees as aggressive, he will respond aggressively. I think he said on 2 occasions he's left the decision in the hands of his generals.
Victor, interesting about India, from everything you just explained, as big as it is, the potential, English-speaking, democratic. And if you went to an institution, I'm just going to say Hoover, this may not be true, but you would have more folks who make an area of study Europe, China, Russia, the Middle East, and India might not be really a priority for
India's pretty good. Hoover's been really good at that. We have 4 or 5 people, not all Indian Americans, but are really pushing that relationship, the Hoover relationship with Indian researchers. And I think part of that is that so many of the CEOs and politicians in Northern California are Indian American, or Indian nationals that are here on green cards. That was one of the key issues that the MAGA base disagreed with the Trump. I don't know if they're all MAGA, but on the immigration, people were saying we have enough people. A lot of immigration reformists say it's not just illegal immigration that's a problem, the 2 million a year, but we're letting in 1 million people, even legally, and we're not able to assimilate, integrate, intermarry that number of people given the lack of civic education or confidence in the melting pot. And so therefore we should restrict legal immigration down to 200,000 or 300,000. And that was a touchy point because Silicon Valley made the argument, well, we need engineers from India. And then the counter-argument to the counter-argument was, well, you really don't, because you're bringing in people, yes, they have BAs, but they're replacing American BAs. You're not bringing in the cream of the cream, PhDs from India, there's some, but what you're interested in is to lower the wages of coders from India and displace Americans. That's a big controversy. I don't have an opinion either way on it. But we should, I'm glad that we're having closer relations with India. In my community, I am speaking right now 2 miles from the second largest Sikh temple in California. And when they have a retreat, they shut down the entire 4-lane thoroughfare next to it. And there's thousands of people. And my neighbors are Sikh, 2 of the 3, 4. And I farmed next door to one of the first Sikh immigrants, my aunt, who was a college teacher at a local junior college for 30 years. She taught him as a student. So my grandfather was one of the first people in this area in the early 1960s to have a Sikh immigrant. And I can name his name. His name is Tarzan Siota. I really liked him. And he once said to me, your grandfather was the only person when I came who was not prejudiced that I was farming and that I was very successful. Your grandfather would come over and ask me if I knew Punjabi techniques about water, and he was very respectful, and his daughter taught me at Reedley College. So I get along. I have a lot of good friends in the Sikh community here.
Yeah. Hey, Victor, before I have to read a little spot, and I'm throwing this out at you because I wanted to have brought it up on the previous show, but this past Saturday's Kentucky Derby, Sovereignty beat Journalism, the horses. And I think there was something symbolic in that. Symbolic may be the wrong word, but, sovereignty prevailed despite journalism.
I used to follow that. I should follow it more. I have a close friend, John Harris. He's a wonderful person. The Harris,
Yeah.
he's not in good health now, but you remember California
Chrome, right?
And he was not owned by John Harris, but he was nurtured in the pasture.
Yeah.
And that was a big thing for California and Central Valley in particular, that a horse that was so-called grew up here won the Kentucky Derby. And I think you were with me once, didn't you? Didn't we go view? Were you with me?
We took a tour, of
the entire. I mean, my God, it was quite impressive. They had a regulation-sized racetrack, and I thought about moving. When I saw the horse stalls, I thought moving in. They were pretty nice, cool, temperature controlled.
Maybe in your next life, if you're a mix of India and this topic, you come back.
John Harris was a real gentleman. As I've said before, I liked his wife a lot, Carol Harris.
Yeah. Very, very kind to me. And the Harris Ranch out in, was it Coalinga? Is that where it's located?
Yes, it's out in Coalinga.
Yeah. Delicious.
He was very honest. It was a very honest company. They didn't have children. She's gone now, and John is not in good health. But one time, I had said something about that on the air maybe 3 years ago, and somebody wrote me and said, you shouldn't give a plug. I think they were a competitor. But the point I'm making, I said I didn't give a plug. It was just true. So the next day, I went in to get my phone fixed, and a guy came in with a Harris Ranch, Mexican-American guy. And I said, you work for John Harris? He said, oh my gosh, I love John Harris. He's so honest. He teaches all of his employees, but dignity. So I kind of proved my own point.
Amen. I have one of those hats. Victor, I visited San Francisco several times in your company. I've never took the tour to Alcatraz. Have you ever been to Alcatraz?
I have, on an Alcatraz tour in 1972. A group of 3 or 4 of us went up we used to go to the bookstores to find classics books, Greek and Latin, in Berkeley and San Francisco. Nobody wanted them, and they were very hard to find text. And we were walking along Fisherman's Wharf. They had those little boats that say Alcatraz, and I think then it was $10, so we jumped on it. But it was weird. We went around the island, and then we docked, and we didn't have enough money to pay for the tour, so it was kind of go around, and you docked and you got out and walked around. But I think there were tours of the interior blocks. I wanted to relive Birdman of Alcatraz with Burt Lancaster.
And Telly Savalas.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it may be relived again, Victor, as you mentioned earlier. Donald Trump has said he wants Alcatraz, which I think was closed in 1963, wants it reopened and expanded and to be used for the most hardened of criminals.
Yeah, that's going to be an ambitious project. Because remember when the Native American community took it over, there was a group called...
I don't remember that.
Yeah, they did. They stormed it and took it over for a couple of years and occupied it. There was a group, you're too young, Jack, but it was a Native American rock group called Redbone, and it was very popular in the San Joaquin Valley. And they wrote a song about Alcatraz. And the physical structure is pretty decayed, and I don't know if it could even be, reinforced to make to meet California earthquake standards. And you would have to have a commute every day by ferry out there. There's no bridges or anything. So you'd have to have a commute for the employees to come back. And I don't know if you still have a Native American contingent that would say that it was sacred ground or belonged to the tribal communities. But there would be and then you're in the Bay Area. So
yes.
And while you're doing this, the state prison at San Quentin, not too far away, also on the Bay, as I recall, is under a process of reimagining. It was to San Quentin along with Folsom, and
yeah, Sean Madden, Reno.
Yeah, it was a place that you don't want to go to.
Yeah.
And but we're reimagining it. I think they're dismantling it as a high, security prison and making it more a transitional halfway house prison. And they're building a new section, but people can correct me if I'm wrong. It has some of the choicest lands, real estate. If a developer bought San Quentin or Alcatraz, they could make a fortune because people would love to live out there with a view.
Yeah, well, that's lucky prisoners.
Yes,
my great.
But I don't know how Donald Trump. I don't know how much it would cost. I imagine it would be $1 billion to rebuild the decaying infrastructure and then get. I don't know. It would be there'd be a lot of overhead for your workforce. Would have to live in San Francisco or maybe San Jose, and then they would have to take a boat out there. There'd have to be security concerns and everything. And I don't know what the idea whether what. Alcatraz, maybe it's an iconic or symbolic act versus somewhere out in, I don't know, the Mojave Desert or something, you know what I mean, where it's inaccessible. If you had it out in the Mojave Desert, you wouldn't even need walls. You just
right. I think a Trump prison in the Bay is a kind of a middle finger to the...
Yeah, I think that's the whole idea, that he wants to tell the left-wing Trump-hating community that you have to do your part for law enforcement.
Well, Victor, we have plenty more to get your take on, and there's a couple of aspects of Lawfare that are on the docket for your opinion, and we will get to those topics and more when we come back from these important messages. Listen, Americans are fed up with Big Pharma controlling health care, raising prices, restricting access, and making it harder to get the medications they need. That's why more people are turning to All Family Pharmacy. You've probably heard of them. They're a family-owned pharmacy in Florida that does things differently. They put you first, giving you the freedom to order what you need, when you need it, so you're never without essential medications. From ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine to antibiotics, daily maintenance meds, and emergency kits, they make sure you have access to the treatments you need without restrictions. They know how important it is to stay prepared, which is why they make it easy to stock up and order treatments in bulk. It's simple. Just order online and they ship your meds to your door. You don't even need your doctor involved. They work directly with licensed doctors to get you the prescriptions you need. Visit their website today and get 10% off your order. Go to allfamilypharmacy.com/Victor and use the code Victor10. Again, that's allfamilypharmacy.com/Victor and use the code Victor10, that's Victor10, to get 10% off your order today. We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Victor, let's see, where should we start? Three things. Let's get the two of the federal court actions out of the way. Not to put it that way, out of the way, but so Perkins Coie, which was executive ordered by Donald Trump, and I thought they backed down. I thought they tried to come to some resolution because it seemed like had Donald Trump cut that law firm off from engagement with the federal government, with cases, with security clearances.
I think he just all he's
$1 billion of revenue.
Yeah, I think all he was saying is that we're not going to use the following law firms to undertake federal cases, right? And then we're not going to give their people security forms, clearances, because they were actively engaged in unethical conduct. And what he meant by that specifically was in 2015 and 2016, the whole Russian collusion demonstrable hoax was ginned up by Hillary Clinton's campaign, and they used the DNC to write the checks, and then they paid Perkins Coie, who then paid Fusion GPS, who then paid Christopher Steele, so that Hillary's funding of Christopher Steele was hidden by 3 paywalls. So they were a major player in that Russian collusion hoax. And I don't think he's punished him in the sense he's going to charge him with anything. He just says, given your behavior and some of the things that they do, we just don't want to do business with you. We don't have any federal business with you. But there may be other punishments I'm not aware of, besides the yanking of their members. Those law firms are the revolving door for senior administration officials that are lawyers. They go into the Pentagon, the State Department, and then they go back. And to be fair to Trump, the number of lawyers who were blacklisted by all those law firms, those blue shoe or blue stocking or silver spoon in their mouth, whatever we call those Washington top-notch law firms, if you had anything to do with supporting Donald Trump and said that you had questions about the election or the elector, anything. I'm not talking about demonstrating on January. If you defended people, you were not going to be back at that law firm. They were going to tell you, they weren't going to fire you. They were going to say the following: if we continue to hire you, then our clients, corporate clients, will punish us. Therefore, for the good of your fellow lawyers, would you please resign? That's what they did. And so I don't have any empathy for them at all.
Well, a federal judge stopped the temporary order blocking the executive order related, and there was an executive order that was specific to Perkins Coie, which leads us into, though, this judge shopping. And there was a decision this past weekend by the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals that entitled "Trump Scores Major Win as Appeals Court Smacks Down Rogue Judges." And the court, I'm not sure, Victor, it was the full court or was a 3-judge panel, etc. But they started the process of kneecapping this judge shopping, judge picking. Who knows if the Supreme Court is going to back them up on this, but they tried to narrow the lanes by which judges can be selected, and when judges are picked, how they can rule on things, or for example, one of the things is disputes over federal grant terminations belong in the Court of Federal Claims, not in district courts. Another thing that the court ruled said issuing broad injunctions without requiring plaintiffs to post a bond could result in irreparable harm to the government. So this is a narrowing of lawfare.
What they're saying, and as I understand it, in this instance and earlier ones, they're basically saying when these left-wing entities want to stop the Donald Trump executive orders, and by the way, there's been more of these injunctions filed by these judges in the first 100 days of Donald Trump's than all of the Biden and Obama together. So what they're saying is there are avenues to express your anger at a administrative executive order, and those are often found within the cabinets involved. So you can make an appeal, you can file a writ, you can first go through the process rather than just want us, a judge, to get into the internal business of HHS, which is an executive question. Under the Constitution, the president has the statutory right. Executive orders have gone, I think there was only one president who hasn't issued, I don't know if it was Benjamin Harrison, just one. They all do it, and that's consistent with the executive powers as outlined in the Constitution. And yet you have these left-wing lawyers that are cherry-picking left-wing judges to interfere with the executive branch because they lost the election. If they really, we haven't had the Supreme Court explicitly say, but if you really there's no real case history here. If you really want to stop the Trump executive orders, then you have two choices. You can win the election in 2028, or you can win a veto-proof majority, a filibuster-proof in the House and Senate in 2026 and pass legislation that will contravene his executive orders. But don't expect a low-ranking district judge to enter in these complex bureaucratic squabbles and how you spend this money and that. And that's what they're saying. They don't have the jurisdiction or the knowledge to go in and do that.
One other lawfare-related topic, Victor. Several weeks ago we talked about a case out in South Dakota which involved the National Forest Service, just ruthless bureaucrats tormenting these ranchers out there and bringing them to court. Trials hadn't started yet, But the husband and wife in one ranching family, they couldn't talk to each other, had to hire separate lawyers, were looking at 10 years in prison over some like really pathetic property line case. Well, and by the way, there's a website called Unwon, UNWON, which did some great reporting on this and other issues related to rural land use issues. They reported, and so has the Secretary of Agriculture on her own, Brooke Rollins. She ordered the case to be dropped, that these folks will not be prosecuted. And then she also, here's a tweet if I can call it a tweet, an X post. I'm calling on any individuals who are currently enduring lawfare conducted by the USDA, Department of Agriculture, and she's the Secretary of Agriculture, to visit the link below and to submit a form. I think that's really cool.
I do too, and I think that from what I've been following with, say, take the U.S. Forest Service, the Trump administration has made some nominations at the second, third, fourth, fifth level that are very corrective of what's going on. And I imagine that the left is going to go hysterical when they see some of these nominees, because they're going to try to rebalance property rights and curtail they're going to try to protect people who have long-standing grazing contracts. Problem with the Biden and the early Obama National Forest Service and all of these federal agencies that control this huge million acres of land is they don't want any private people on it. If you have a legacy cabin that you had at Huntington Lake and you had a 99-year lease, and when it came up, they were not going to give you an extended lease. It was going to be 1 or 2 years, and they want you out. If it burns down, it's going to be almost impossible to rebuild. Their way of thinking, federal lands should be put off of all people activity, and they should belong to an elite, properly educated, properly trained, left-wing stewardship. And these people should have unlimited access to all of it and to do what they want with it for the greater good, they say. So they don't want people mining, they don't want people drilling, they don't want people living there, they don't want cows grazing there, they don't want hereditary rights of families over multi-generations who are usually really good custodians. They don't want any of that. They just want to make it a pristine wilderness of which Sierra Club type members, they go in and then they have a nice time and they look at the scenario, and then that's how they envision these national treasures. So as has been pointed out, we have a lot of rare earth minerals in California and the Dakotas and Wyoming that we could easily exploit and not be nearly so dependent on China. And we have technologies that are even trying to make batteries out of sodium and stuff. So we could be self-sufficient in so many areas if we just responsibly extracted the mineral wealth on federal lands. And a lot of the people, I can tell you, of having a house, I have private land up at Huntington Lake. The people who had those legacy cabins on federal National Service land, they were the best stewards you could imagine. They took care of the lake. They watched out for fires. They were careful about brooks. They cleaned up around their very rustic cabins from the 1912, 15, 18. They'd been in the family, and then sometimes and then they just burned down because of lax Forest Service. Usually what's happened when you look at these interactions between the National Forest Service and individual people who are renting or leasing or occupying legally land in their jurisdiction, the culpability is on the National Forest Service. They're the ones that have different ideas depending on the state in which they're in about. And we've talked about fire prevention. The left wing's idea of fire prevention is just let it burn, and then it'll make nice little decayed wood for bugs and salamanders and birds, ecosystems. But don't let timber companies come in and thin out the forest. Don't let weekend people come in and cut wood for their fireplaces. Don't do any of that.
Yeah.
And it's backfired horrifically in California.
Victor, for those who don't know who Brooke Rollins is, Secretary of Agriculture, she ran the Texas Public Policy Center for a number of years, and she's such a smart, solid citizen. I think I was a little surprised that she was picked to run Department of Agriculture, but so be it. She is a great conservative, and she's done a great thing.
This we've reiterated. I don't want to get into personalities, but This administration is very different than the first Trump administration. He came in, he said he'd only been in Washington, 15 or 16 times? And nobody thought he was going to win the election. I'm not sure he did. So he came in and he was smothered by recommendations of the Republican orthodoxy and the bipartisan, what would you call it, a Acela corridor. So in this administration, the second one, and I'm not criticizing, I like Bill Barr, but there are no John Boltons, there are no Jim Mattises, there are no Rex Tillerson, there's none of those people that were fixtures in the Washington diplomatic or corporate or political world. They're just not.
Still don't
and
understand
there's
the Rex
not a lot of
Tillerson.
Scaramucci's either, or Omarosa.
Yeah.
So they're very good people, and they're force multiplier of the MAGA agenda. They're not doing one of two things that happened in the first administration. That idiot Trump, I'm going to use my bureaucratic expertise to stop the implementation of that idiotic order, or the order is idiotic, and I know what he really meant, so I'm going to reinterpret it in a way that he might think is superior to his own. This group is, I'm here because I am in line ideologically with Donald Trump, and my duty is to implement his agenda as quickly, efficiently, and effectively as possible. And he's brought in a lot of people who have that history of doing it. Doug Bergman, at the Department of Interior, and we've got the Department of Energy Secretary. Gosh, they're can-do people.
Yeah. And are doing, which is, you've talked about it here in many podcasts, and our friend Steve Hayward, who has his own Substack now, he used to be on Powerline all the time. God bless Powerline.
I like Steve a lot. I like reading what he writes.
He wrote a piece the other day of not tired of winning in the face of all this PR about bad polls, etc. And these things like what Brooke Rollins has done, and then you have, NPR, Donald Trump taking the budget acts to PBS and NPR. These are the things he said he was going to run on. He ran on them, and now he's executing it. And I have a feeling this is all...
Yeah, there's been a lot of misinformation about PBS and NPR because they keep saying, well, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting gets very little money and most of it's corporate supply, but that's not the truth, because the federal money is dispersed to the satellite stations to fund them so they can buy the product that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting either creates or franchises for them. So if you say you're not going to give money to these satellite stations, then they're not going to be able to pay the Corporation of Public Broadcasting the type of revenues that they call non-governmental, you know what I mean? Because they say they come from other entities, but they don't really. And so there's so many good arguments to let the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, NPR and PBS, just free range, go on your own. They compete with commercial stations, and they have so many advantages. They don't pay taxes. They have certain advantages of being government entities. And it was a good idea in the 70s. When I was growing up, there were three stations, the ABC, NBC, and CBS, and then there was a weirdo station or something. You know what I mean? And that was it. You had four choices. And then when they came in, you got all these other choices. But that was 600. You turn on DirecTV. Every time I look at my DirecTV subscription, I find another station I never knew existed in the pack. 600 stations. And there must be 10 children's shows, you know what I mean, of all different sizes and shapes. And they don't. And then when you look at their political commentary, I used to be amazed because I drive from Fresno County all the way over to Palo Alto, and every once in a while I wanted to turn on NPR to listen to the commentary. It was never an exception. It was always something. In the last 10 years, it was like this.
Well, Donald Trump, the latest story of Donald Trump exceeded his statutory authority once more. We're going to cut to Germany, where there's a new meme in Germany as Donald Trump is Adolf Hitler.
And they would do that. And then you turn on PBS, and then, is it Jonathan Capehart, the left-wing guy? And then you think, well, there's going to be at least a Newt Gingrich type guy, right? Or a Molly Hemingway conservative, or, Kim Strassel, one of the iconic people who could devour him. And it's what's his name?
David Brooks.
David Brooks. And David Brooks' latest thing is he called the deliberate, willful, intentional destruction of the jurisprudence system by Judge Dugan, who broke her oath of office, denied justice to the victims in her courtroom, heroic. She's heroic. No, 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 no. To quote Reverend Jeremiah Wright, no, 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 no. That's not happening. She was not courageous. But he's not a conservative. He would say that he's not a conservative. So they knew what they were doing. That's a good phrase for everybody to remember. When you feel, is Trump doing a little bit too much? No. They know they're culpable. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting knows that it is a politically left-wing entity that tries to, through its news divisions and its cultural offerings, offer a slanted view. Yes, sometimes it imports British movies and British TV series that are great. Downington Abbey was fine, but most of the content is left of center, just like Voice of America. And so it's time to let them be left-wing. Let them be what they be. And they should say, let Reagan be Reagan. Let it be what it wants.
All these used to be founded with conservative money, philanthropies that are Ford, Pew, MacArthur, that are now swollen with billions of dollars, that only spend 5% of their assets a year. Let them fund it. You know, they've got the money. The money's there.
I was speaking at a retreat, I won't say where or for whom, and one of the, overseer donors came up to me and said, "Are you angry about the PBS?" I said, "No," and she said to me, it was nothing. It was just 5 fighter planes. 500 million, right? And I guess she meant an F-35 is what, 120 million?
Oh.
I guess we just lost one of these Hornets or something. They just threw them over the side the other day. But my point is, I said, well, if it was my choice, I would love to have 5 F-35s more than we have now, because they would keep us safe. And these people are not keeping us safe. They're telling the world that we're a screwed up society that's racist, sexist, homophobic, nativist, xenophobic. That's what they say, basically.
Well, maybe these people, they like to see their names flash quickly at the beginning or the end of some of these shows and tell their.
I was about 8 years ago. Remember Fresh Air and Talk of the. I used to like Neil. What's his name? He was Talk of the Nation. He was really good. Neil Conan.
I never listened.
He was very fair. He really was. But once there was a Fresh Air or something. It was about indoor flowers and orchids. You know. And I thought, wow, this is going to be interesting, because I like flowers and gardening. But the story was, it was kind of a metaphor. I don't know if it was fiction or nonfiction. She's doing all these wonderful things. She's out there spraying it, and then her plants look greener, but then she starts to get ill, and then she doesn't feel well, and then we find out that her addiction to petrochemicals and organophosphates and organochloride pesticides has sickened her, and so she's into this American trap of trying to make her orchids and flowers look nice at the expense of organic farming. That was all it was. There was a message in everything they said. They said.
Yeah. Hey, Victor, by the way, I would take a little, I heard a little bit when you talked about the weirdo station. You know, you had the 3 and the PBS. The weirdo station was the one which on Saturday afternoon at 5 o'clock, I could watch Lucha Libre wrestling on.
Yes, I used to watch it. I used to watch Pepper Gomez and Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens. I watched all those when I got home from work. They used to have a really good show. Do you remember? It was Bill Halsey, and it was about a submarines. And he had documentary. It was up. It wasn't called Up Periscope, but it was the deep sea. And then this guy, he was right. It was in the 50s.
Wasn't Diver Dan, was it?
Yeah, no, it was Bill Halsey, the famous. No. And he would go, and we hit him hard with a bolo class. We sailed right into Tokyo Bay. And he was really good. He was there. He was, he missed the Battle of Midway because he had a skin disease, unfortunately. I like Bill Halsey. He was at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and he went headstrong in the wrong direction to get it. He's kind of like John McCain's grandfather was a great battleship admiral.
Was he?
And he was
at
already.
Pearl
he was
Harbor?
what?
Was he at Pearl Harbor?
I don't know if he was at there, but he was. I think he made 4-star, and he was in charge of the a lot of the battleship contingents. And he was a fighter like Halsey. Those old guys, if they found out, if there was a report that a Japanese fleet was 500 miles in a certain direction, they didn't care which way it was going. They just took off, to go meet it. They weren't kind of like Spruance and Nimitz, who were very careful, sober, and judicious.
Well,
Great admirals, both of them. I'm not weighing in on one side or the other. We were very lucky. We had brilliant naval commanders in World War II. Absolutely brilliant. And we had brilliant ship designers. Where are those guys that designed all the Essex class and the North Carolina and the Iowa class battleships and all these great heavy cruisers? I don't know where they are.
if we had them, where would they go build a ship? I read something recently
I don't know.
about
They're
we
gone.
have Italy building our military.
Yeah, Italy and the Netherlands, they're all building. Where are they? We had, just like Germany, they decommissioned all of their nuclear plants. And I was reading the other day, they only have like 1 or 2 nuclear physicists at their major universities. That's a dead field. And they were the people, remember, the Germans they were ahead of us on nuclear fission and stuff in terms of domestic power usage. They were the master builders of atomic energy plants, and now they're just gone.
Well, you've talked about what happened in Spain and Portugal, and I ain't no expert on electricity or just about anything, Victor, but the quality or the source of electricity, if it's wind and solar, let's just say it's worse than electricity produced by nuclear, which is, of course, more efficient. And it's the quality of that power or the lack of quality of the power, which is now wind and solar, that is going to just lead to continued chaos in throughout Europe, because they're all interconnected.
It's like your plumbing system. You need 60 pounds of water, 40 to 60 pounds in your house all the time to surge it. And so if I have my own pump, so if I have a leaky faucet or somebody left the water on, I have the pump that'll go on and surge it so you can maintain that pressure. But if you have wind and solar, and you are bragging, as Spain did, that for a moment, about a month or two ago, they were 100% producing wind and solar, you don't have a constant source that can immediately surge enormous amounts of megawatts into the system. So if there's any glitch, and say at 2 o'clock, all of Spain's in a rainstorm, or the wind dies, and that starts to dip down, then you need immediately to surge power into the system to keep the proverbial pressure up, like your blood system. And if you don't have it, then you can't restart the generation, and it starts to shut down automatically to save the pressure where it can be saved.
Right.
Because if it tries to supply the whole grid, it will just all shut down. So they were trying to bring in, the nuclear power sources from France as much as they could. But and here in California, we tried to do this with Moss Landing. We tried to make this mega battery plant. So we have an excess of solar power during the day. It's very expensive per kilowatt, much more so than nuclear or natural gas. But we've had 2 cataclysms there where they caught fire. We blew up, we tore down, we decommissioned this wonderful natural gas oil burning Moss Landing that was a reliable producer of lots of energy. We tried to make it into a battery place, and it doesn't work, and it's cost billions of dollars. And now California will not give back money that's worth it to put solar panels on your home, because they've tripled the price per kilowatt that you pay, and they've cut by 2/3 or so what you get for generating it. So now people are buying batteries, and the problem with that is they're self-sufficient. They generate their own electricity that fills their battery, and then they use the battery, but they don't. The state doesn't get any money for the grid, the overhead. From solar panel homes, and we have too much during the day, and we don't have enough to keep going at night. So after 5 or 6 o'clock, we've got to import it from, Arizona, Utah. A lot of it's coal provided. Yeah. And this is just crazy, and it's expensive. And I said the other day, I was talking about California, I said, if we just took the California legislature and Gavin, and we put them in a big helicopter, and we flew up to Big Sur, and we landed on Highway 1. And we said, this highway has been shut down by one landslide for 800 days. And we know you don't like tourists. We know you don't like anybody enjoying the beautiful scenery of Big Sur, but people can't get to it. Can you fix that? And then we would go to Pacific Palisades and say, here's Highway 1 that's still shut down. And people can't go from, say, Pepperdine to LAX in an expeditious fashion. Could you fix it? Now, here's Tulare to Delano, 99. It is the main north-south thoroughfare in California. This has not changed since 1960. It's only 2 lanes in each direction, and it shuts down the entire thoroughfare from north to south north to South California. If one wreck, would you please make it 6 lanes? And then we could go up to the Klamath River and say, Gavin, legislature, please, why did you blow up these and make this ugly mudslide through the river of the Klamath? Why did you take $250 billion out of the California bond to build dams and said you blew them up? We could do that. Then we could take them up to Richmond and say, we need gasoline. We're the highest priced gas, not just because of the highest taxes, but the cost and the blends. And we need this refinery, and they're leaving because you regulate them out of business. You hate them. Who's going to give us gasoline? And you hate Elon, so you don't want, I don't know, and you won't build nuclear plants to charge the Teslas. So we could take them all around the state, and we could take them, I think, right near my house. I would be willing to lead that tour. Mm-hmm. And I'd say, California legislature, Gavin, here is high-speed rail. It didn't cost $15 billion. It's going to cost $30, and it's not even close to being built. You don't have the money even to do the station in Fresno. You're going to have to downsize it. And nobody's going to buy a ticket from from Bakersfield to Merced. Even if you built it right now and somebody paid the entire cost, it would still lose money when you ran it because nobody wants to go there.
Yeah.
And so that's what California is, and these people have destroyed it. But if you just took them on a tour and showed them exactly what they've done to people, maybe we need a good conservative to come in here and say, you know what, I'm going to shut down high-speed rail. I'm just going to shut it down, and we're going to try to, if we can possibly get Amtrak in 2 different directions and improve the track, maybe we can do that, make it go 80 miles an hour with not having to sit on the side rail. We can do that. We're going to make 6 lanes in the I-5, 6 lanes in the 99, 6 lanes in 101. We're going to try to beef up. We're going to make that Los Angeles airport where you can't even get out of the airport without getting into bumper traffic. Yeah. We're going to make some freeways that get you on. We could do all that. We need about 10 more dams to make sure on a wet year we have plenty of water. That's not hard to do. Gavin just keeps saying, I'm going to have a podcast, and I don't like women and competing against, and he never does anything. He's just sounding off. He's a complete, I don't know what you'd call him, functionary, wax and effigy. But they need somebody to build the infrastructure of this state and get people working, and it's not going to work. And when you have 200,000 to 300,000 of your upper income professionals leaving the state, and you've got 200,000 or 300,000 of very poor people coming from different countries. It's, when you drive in California, you say 27% of the population, that every 4th car is a person that was not born in the United States. So it's going to be very hard for some of them to be acquainted, especially recent arrivals, and that's not counting to know what the traffic rules and protocols are,
or to read the
or the signs. Yeah, I think we just passed a law that every truck driver was that Florida or California, must know English. I think that was a federal law, maybe, to be licensed. That didn't seem like it was asking much for a guy with a huge multi-ton. In California, every once in a while when I was growing up, you'd see a trucker get in the middle lane, and now they look around and they get in the left lane. And I've seen 3 trucks left, middle, and that's supposed to be an automatic fine, but they're completely in control.
Well, hey, Victor, we have time for, I think, one more big topic and your take on it, and that will be about college presidents rallying to take on Donald Trump and his executive orders. And we'll do that. We'll get your take when we come back from these final important messages. We'll return to our program shortly, but first, an important message about your financial future. Have you noticed gold's remarkable movement? While headlines focus on record gold prices, what's really happening is our dollars are losing value at an accelerating rate. Gold isn't expensive. It's doing exactly what it's done for 5,000 years, maintaining consistent purchasing power while paper currencies weaken. It's like a financial measuring stick showing the truth about our shrinking dollar. Many investors hesitate, thinking they've missed the opportunity because gold seems high. This fundamental misunderstanding keeps them from acting until it's too late. When currencies begin to falter, gold doesn't inch higher. It typically makes dramatic moves that leave unprepared investors behind. American Alternative Assets created a free wealth protection guide to help safeguard your retirement savings. Call 833-2-USA-GOLD or visit VictorLovesGold.com today. That's 833-287-2465 or visit VictorLovesGold.com. Protect what you've earned before the opportunity vanishes. We are back with the Victor Davis Hanson Show. This show is recorded on Monday, the 5th of May. It is up on the World Wide Webs on Thursday, May 8th. And on those same World Wide Webs, you will find The Blade of Perseus. That's Victor's website. VictorHanson.com is the address. Do go there. Why? Well, you'll find it's a Hanson-a-palooza. It's everything Victor does. You will find his weekly essay for American greatness, his weekly syndicated column, links to his various appearances, the archives of these podcasts, links to Victor's book, and the Ultra articles and video. What's that? Twice a week, Victor writes a piece exclusive for The Blade of Perseus, and once a week, an exclusive video. Do subscribe. It's $6.50 a month to stick your toe in the water. But if you want to subscribe for the full year, it's discounted to $65. You cannot be a fan of Victor Davis Hanson and not visit this place. So go there. And by the way, again, I've said this on a couple of prior podcasts. I think it'll make a great gift. Dad, if your mom, dad are big fans of Victor, nice Mother's Day gift, nice Father's Day gift. So, Victor, speaking of mothers, by the way, Victor, and I do want to ask you about these college presidents, Mother's Day coming up. And when you're on Fox's, you picture your mom behind you. You've talked about your mom most lovely. No question you loved and admired your mom. And I'm curious with Mother's Day coming up, was Mom a good cook? And if she was, did she have a special dish?
She was a very good cook. And my father, he went through some life changes when he was 50. He was a college administrator. He had farmed. And then when my mother became a superior court judge, he got into chauffeuring her and helping her. He was very accommodating, and he decided that he would take over the cooking responsibilities. But he did it very scientifically. He read cookbooks, and he was a very good cook. He was like a chef. So he was very good. We always every Sunday afternoon, she had a small roast, and then she had this huge green salad, and then we usually had a baked potato, and then it was very funny. My parents never drank any alcohol whatsoever until they were 55. We just didn't have it. And then they had a pie. My mother really was kind of a pie. She made beautiful apple pies. She was but she was a very unusual person. She had two sisters, and they grew up on a farm, very poor. But my grandfather, because he was afraid he didn't have sons and he didn't know who was going to inherit the farm, so he sent them all to universities, and he mortgaged his farm. So my mother and her sister went to Stanford University. My mother delayed that to follow my father on a football scholarship to University Pacific. Then she went back to Stanford and got another BA. And then she got an JD, or it was called an LLB, I think, in those days. 1946. She was one of the first women graduates. And then my aunt got a BA and a master. So that my grandfather thought, well, surely they're going to be able to have incomes to help save the ranch. And my third daughter was severely crippled, and she couldn't do it. Her name was Lila. And she lived her whole life in the house that I'm living here. But I was very fortunate. So many parents have, in that generation, especially that came of age after World War II, they were a tough bunch, really tough, disciplinarians, smoking. My father drank and smoked, but never in an abusive manner. So I really won the lottery. I have not one criticism to make and many compliments. I don't think I'd ever have done what I did. I remember I was 25 and my mom called up and said, well, we'd like to go to your graduation. You're getting your PhD. And I said, I'm not going to go. I said, there's no jobs. I just interviewed at the Naval Academy. I did a great interview. They said, we're not going to hire any white males. We want to warn you. I said, I wanted to go to Reed College. They said, we're not going to hire you. I have a book coming out. I finished quicker than almost anybody in the PhD program. And my mom said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I think I like to come home and farm. And she goes, well, you're so educated. But come home. That's fine. That is whatever you want to do is good. You can learn how to do it again, and then maybe something. And that was her attitude all the time. Yeah. It was always upbeat. Always work. Keep options open. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. Always reaffirming. I was very lucky. Yeah. And she was she had been the first female. At 17, she was the first female student body president of her high school class. It was very unusual in 1939 to be a woman student body president. And then she immediately, in 41, she took a year at the junior college, and she organized a group, the Selma Enterprise local paper, Lowell Pratt, to campaign to organize farmers to help the Japanese relocation they farm their, I won't mention the name, but there were a couple of entities that we don't like to talk about in this area that were packers that once these beautiful Japanese American ranches were forced, because they went to places like Manzanar, they bought their ranches at discount prices. But there were other people who either farmed them or tried to organize people to hold them for Japanese farmers. And she was one of the people who tried to organize that. And then she came home and couldn't really get a job, even with a Stanford degree. They hired her as a legal secretary, and she got married, and she had 4 kids. One passed away, and a sister. And then she just was the wonderful mom on this farm. We had an 800 square foot home. She was kind of the butt of abuse of local people. They'd say, "Wow, you went and got a BA, you got a BA at University of Pacific, BA at Stanford, law degree at Stanford, and 38 years old, and you're just a mom?" And she thought that was great to be a mom. And then when I was 9 years old, they opened an appellate court. She was the head research attorney, and then she was appointed a superior. I think she was the second appellate court judge in California to be a woman. She's very bright, and so she was legalistic, you know what I mean? She would call me up, and instead of saying, "I feel so bad that you have your taxes," she would say, "Go over your taxes, and please do not take any deductions that are questionable, not one." And she would hear a couple of farmers come over, and she would come and visit, and they were saying, "I'm going to get this in cash," and she'd say, "Victor, please do not be influenced by that. You do not have any cash income. Anything that you have cash, you report every single penny." It was like that the whole time, very legalistic. Yeah. And I was very lucky with my father, too. He was just the opposite. He was a happy-go-lucky guy, but he was very bright and very supportive. I never really talked to my siblings what they thought. If they had, I just assumed they had the same high regard for them that I did.
Yeah.
But
well, it's beautiful, Victor. Really,
but I was
really beautiful.
They were kind of worried about me because my 2 brothers were very bright, but they were very athletic, and I was left-handed. I played all these sports. My wife and I were at a dinner the other night, and one of the guys that showed up was a really sweet guy, and he listens to our podcast. He had compliments for you, Jack. And he went on the Salma Enterprise and Googled everything that I had ever done at Salma High School. 50, and he gave it to us. He gave us Xerox, and he said, "You said you were a bad athlete, but you led the JV football team in tackles and got an award." And I didn't even forgot that. And he was showing me all these things. I said, "Yeah, but I was a bad athlete, trust me." And I was left wing. I was the only person that had bad eyesight in my family. I wore glasses. I was left-handed. I had my nose in a book all the time. So my dad was and I was sickly as a kid. I'd get all these, I got every type of illness.
You're still getting them. Yeah.
I do. Malaria, amoebic dysentery when I was 18. Every time I went overseas, I ended up in the hospital. But anyway, the point I'm making is that they were thought I was a kind of a weirdo, but in a good way. But I was very lucky that I had 2 brothers that were very bright. My twin brother was a math whiz, and he got a master's in biology, and he farmed. My older brother was a very good writer, but he was a literary guy, so he didn't make a lot of money. That didn't matter. He was very talented. I have some of his stuff on my website. So I was very lucky.
Well, that's terrific.
My parents, they were right out of a textbook. My father volunteered to go in World War II and had a really horrific time on a B-29. His first cousin, who was basically his adopted brother, was killed last day at Sugarloaf, and he was he was hyper-patriotic. I know that. He said that when he dropped me off I think I've told that story, when he dropped me off at Santa Cruz at the dorm. It just happened to be in 1971 when there was a protest. He dropped me, I had to take my car home to get fixed, and then he drove me back. And 2 things happened that day. He went into the we were co-ed dorms, but we were the male side of the freeway, and 2 people were fornicating in the shower. And then he saw the room next to me had drug prices, hashish, coke, on the door. And then he leaned against the wall. There was a big picture of Ho Chi Minh, but they had kicked in the sheetrock, so they hid all the places where they got rowdy and broke and he almost fell through the wall. And then he looked at the protests and he said, I feel sorry for you when this bunch takes over. I was thinking that the other day. I said, Dad, you were very present. This bunch did
right.
take over. They took over.
Well, I should have raised this at the end to go out on a high, because we may go out on a low rant. And thanks for that, by the way, Victor. We'll end the show today getting your take on these college presidents. Over 600 now have signed a letter, and they're most of the Ivies, not Dartmouth, not the college president at Dartmouth. Actually, a couple of, Hopkins hasn't, Stanford. There are a number of, elite prestigious colleges not part of this, but most elite prestigious are. What is it? It's this letter to take on Trump. And here's the beginning of the letter. By the way, it doesn't mention Trump by name, does not mention his administration, does not target any specific executive order he's taken. But here's how it begins. As leaders of America's colleges, universities, and scholarly societies, we speak with one voice against the unprecedented government overreach and political interference now endangering American higher education. We are open to constructive reform and do not oppose legitimate government oversight. That's very nice of them. However, we must oppose undue government intrusion in the lives of those who learn, live, and work on our campuses. We will always seek effective and fair financial practices, but we must reject the coercive use of public research funding. Victor?
It's a very easy answer, isn't there, Jack? You just say, why didn't they have a little coda at the bottom? And by the way, federal government, we are no longer going to price gouge you at 50 to 60% surcharge on our HHS or Department of Energy grants. We're only going to do 15% in the way that we charge other private foundations that give us money. No more price gouging. Number two, we follow the 1964 and 1965 civil rights legislation, the recent Supreme Court 2020 decision against Harvard and University of North Carolina, and therefore there will be no racially segregated safe spaces, dorms, or graduation ceremonies. I know we call them alternate or auxiliary, but they're not. They're really racist. So we're not going to do that anymore. And we know that $60 billion has come from Qatar and China to affect and influence our curricula and our ideology, and we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to take any more money from communist China, and there has been reports that Harvard, for example, partnered with a entity that later was involved in harassing or persecuting the Uyghurs, and it did have a sistership with Bezert University on the West Bank, a terrorist group. Some terrorists were involved, and suddenly they decided they shouldn't do that, Jack. And Trump got elected. And then we have $1.7 trillion, but we're going to, since we're private entities, and since when you started the federal loan guarantee program, we raised the annual rate of inflation, twice the rate of annual inflation, we raised tuition. So we're going to promise to have tuition raises commensurate with the inflation rate, and we are going to back our own student loans at Harvard and Yale and Stanford. We have multi-billion-dollar reserves, and if a student wants financial help, we'll lend him money, we'll charge him interest, and if he defaults, we lose the money. Therefore, there's a moral hazard there, and we're going to go make sure he graduates in 4 years and gets a job. They could do that. No federal money, no price gouging. We are not going to admit people on the basis of races. Stanford doesn't, I don't think Stanford signed that because they have
did not.
Yeah, a more reasonable president. That's the optimistic view. But if you go on the Stanford website last year, you will see that the people who were admitted to the new class of incoming freshmen that came in, 9% were white males. If I'm not mistaken, 34 or 35% of the nation is white males. And I would like to see the SAT scores and grades of the white males who were rejected commiserate with other groups. So they know what they were doing. They were fined by the first Trump administration because they had taken money from China and not reported it. The Confucius Institute, they had a member of the PLA, People's Liberation Army, colonel, I think she was, as a visiting professor, didn't tell anybody. I think they would be very, very careful not to sign that because the Stanford Faculty Senate quite unfairly censored Jay Bhattacharya, and now he's the head of $50 billion of disbursement at HHS. I don't think they'd want to go there. I don't think they want to talk about anti-Semitism on campus at Stanford because we had students tearing down Jewish posters, intimidating Jews, and we had a 900-page liberal faculty authored investigative report at anti-Semitism and found that it was systemic from top to bottom, anti-Semitism. So I don't think we want to talk about our grading policy, which like Yale is probably 70 or 80% A's. So there's so much culpability there that they don't want to. I think Stanford wisely just said, well, we'll deal with you when you come looking at us, but we're not going to provoke you, because if you provoke us, you'll turn over this rock. And we've got a lot of stuff that we would not want to talk to you about, because we violate due process when somebody's charged with sexual harassment or hate speech. We violate civil rights legislation by racial tribalism and prejudice. We don't report fully all the foreign money that comes in for nefarious purposes. We take advantage of the student loan and jack up tuition more than inflation. And we really gouge you guys on federal grants. We get, 50%. So I think a lot of universities didn't want to go there, and the ones that didn't really tell people. Again, I can see that they don't want the federal government to come in and set their curriculum. But there's two final issues, and then I'll shut up, Jack. And the first issue is they do not want the public to know what they're doing. The more the public knows what they're doing, every poll that's taken shows a dramatic drop in confidence in higher education. That's number one. They shouldn't do it. And if they do, people are not going to like it. And the second thing is they love federal intervention when it's left-wing governments. They love the federal government to come into a university and say, listen, your football team and your baseball and basketball team have all this money they make, and they have all these athletes. We want women's sports to have one athlete for one male, and you're going to take that money that you made out of those and you're going to give it to women, or you're going to cut your, And sometimes it was good. They told Bob Jones University, if you don't want black people to date white people, then don't take federal money. And they cut them off. So they could set the same principle. If you don't want to treat people equitably and you tell white males that they're not going to have the same chance of getting in as black males or black women or Latino, then we're not going to give you any money.
Right.
It's the same thing, but they like federal intervention to force down the throats, transgendered sports and all of this stuff, but they don't like it when it's not left-wing.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Victor. I just have to throw one last thing out here quickly. I don't mean throw it out, but just raise it quickly. I mentioned before about who's happier, married moms or single women. So there was a poll done by the IFS Wheatley Institution Marriage and Motherhood Survey conducted in March of women 25 to 55 and with kids. And with kids means that kids under the age of 18 and living with them. So who's happiest of American women? Married with kids, very happy, 21%, pretty happy, 54%. So that means 75% of American women who are married with kids are happy, very or pretty. And there are four categories: married without kids, unmarried with kids, unmarried without kids. Unmarried without kids, only 10% are very happy, and 47% are pretty happy. So that's not, that's 57%. But 44% of American women who are unmarried without kids are not too happy, compared to married with kids, only 24%. So anyway, Victor, as we head into Mother's Day, it's just an interesting take. I think.
Yeah, I taught an department
this is kind of obvious.
I taught in a department of 20 faculty members for 21 years, except for if we took our one Mormon faculty member out who had a huge family, and you looked at the average number, it was less than one. And I had 3 children. A French professor said I was a breeder. Yeah, I mean, they were not happy people, believe me. And you got to be very careful what you say, or you get into J.D. Vance backlash of lady.
Yeah.
It's if you look at a lot of those demonstrations, that you see with the people with purple hair and the palette, all that stuff, you see an archetype person who looks very. You have to be careful. Tucker Carlson got in trouble the other day because he said that the Obamas were not happy. Merrily, they were on the edge of divorce. And then he went by extraneous reasoning, he said, and therefore that's what's wrong with most women, or that they're unhappy in their marriage and they take it out on the country. I don't know if that is true or not. Even if you didn't, I mean, the Greeks had this idea that you change diapers so the people's diapers you change yours. I think that's somewhere in the...
Yeah. That's why I have 5 kids.
Yeah, but
I don't think the point of this is to diminish women who are unhappy. I think it's to say that, women who take I'm going to be married mom, stay at home mom, raise family, whatever, somehow or other, they're picking the worst road, but they seem to be genuinely much happier than those that take another
I think
road.
it's something to do with attention diverted from oneself. So if you're married and have children, you've got... When I call up my daughter, she has a daughter who is 16, a boy who is 8, and a daughter who is 10 who's severely disabled. It's kind of a Down syndrome called Smith-Magenis syndrome. It's very serious, missing 2 genes. But when I talk to her, it's like this: Declan's got a bad sore throat. I'm running over to urgent care. And I've got to make sure Maeve gets to school because she has a band recital, and I've got to time it so I can get back here and get her. And Lila had a meltdown at school, and they've just called me, and they're pumping out the cesspool. And can you tell me, should I put in special little pipes there? PG&E just came out and said we're out of compliance because an oak tree the wire's going. And that's what she tells me every single day. And at the end, she gets very fulfilled. She's very happy. She has a BA. She was an event planner for a long time until she was 26, but she's never been happier. And she gets her chainsaw and goes out and works, and she's digging. I said, well, it's going to cost you, where you live in the foothills above Sacramento, it's going to cost you a fortune to pump out your 2 cells. She just bought this house. We bought this house. And then we didn't know the cesspool, so they had to I said, make sure you put pipes into the cesspool so you don't have to do this. But it's going to be expensive up there to pump it out and then to put this, so, these caps so you know where it is. Next time it'll be easy. And she called me and said, well, I saved $350, dug it out myself.
It's good.
Yeah, that was good for her. I've never seen her so happy and fulfilled. But sometimes it can be overwhelming. I mean, I used to, just to finish this, I live on this farm, and we had all these nieces and nephews, my brothers and cousins' kids. It was like a big tribal compound for 20 years. And when the packing house, the kids needed somewhere to go for break, and my house was the only one near the parking house. And we used to call our swimming pool spin and rinse. So they were all dirty. They just jump in with their clothes. So I would come home, and there would be 11 children here. 11 all over the farm, and the pool would have it looked like it was a dirty water spring, and I would be trying to clean it up, and then everybody would be screaming and yelling, and somebody would come in and said, I dropped a Coca-Cola, don't step there, there's glass everywhere, and we've got to go do it. And I always thought it was pretty good. I was happy. You look back, and it's the happiest point of your life when you have all that activity.
I have 5 kids, and I enjoyed the chaos. And this was the house that when Mary and Andy, my number 2 and number 3 kids, every night there'd be 10 kids not named Fowler in my house and feeding them. And it was great. It was a great period.
Here. I remember one time this kid was here, and he was from a very poor family. And I said to him, I just noticed he was around. There were so many kids. And I said, how long have you been here? And he said, 5 days. I said, he was kind of from a broken home. And I said, well, where's your mom? And he said, she just left me here. She thought I'd like it. And so I said to my son, is he your friend? He goes, kind of. I said, he's been here for 5 days. He goes, yeah, he's hungry and we're feeding him and he wants to move in. So then his mother was down in L.A. and she came back and said, well, I forgot how long he was here. Anyway, that happened a lot, stuff like that. Anyway.
Viva La Hansons. Well, Victor, you've been terrific today. I want to say thank you to the folks who watch and listen, and particularly for me, Jack Fowler, the folks that subscribe to Civil Thoughts, which is the free weekly email newsletter I write for the Center for Civil Society, where we're trying to strengthen civil society. You can get it, too, if you go to civilthoughts.com, sign up. It's totally free. We're not selling your name. What you get is every Friday an email from me, and it's got 14 recommended readings and a pretty lousy joke, too, at the end. But I think you'll enjoy it. And again, do consider subscribing to The Blade of Perseus at victorhanson.com. I thought I usually read something here or something. A nice person says about the show. And here's one. NATO SOCOM wrote, this is off of a YouTube comment. I don't know Victor personally, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out he actually cares about somebody other than himself. That's the most important thing to me. Are you selfish, or do you actually care about other people? That's why I respect VDH's opinions even more, because I know he's sincere, which is extremely rare in today's world, which kind of like melds with just what we were talking about. Yeah, isn't that nice? Yeah.
That's very nice. I wish Gavin Newsom cared for people in California, other than
he does. The one in the mirror.
Yeah, the one in the mirror and the one who writes a check.
All right, Victor, you've been great. Thanks, thanks, folks, for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Victor Davis Hanson Show. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.